I sighed, assuming the weather was messing with the line, and decided I could handle one night without internet. Honestly, it felt almost symbolic. I slid my phone onto the counter, screen dark, and went to stretch out on the couch. Sometime around 10, I heard what sounded like a heel, or maybe a boot, step once on the porch. Just one sharp, heavy thud above the storm's muffled hum. I muted the TV and listened. Nothing. I got up, walked to the front window, and peeked through the curtains. The porch light showed nothing but swirling snow and the faint outline of my stairs. No car in the driveway. No figure at the door. I told myself it was just ice shifting or something falling over outside. I turned the TV back on, but I didn't turn the volume up as high again. About half an hour later, the house made another sound, this time distinctly inside. A soft, deliberate click, like a light switch being tested or a doorknob barely turned. It came from the hallway near the back bedrooms. My scalp tingled. I froze on the couch, eyes locked on the dark hall. "Hello?" I called out, instantly regretting the decision. My voice sounded too small and too aware. The only answer was the heater gently cycling on. I waited a full minute before I forced myself to stand up and walk toward the hallway. The bedroom doors were closed just as I'd left them. The bathroom light was off. I checked every room, even opened the closet in the guest room. Nothing. No sign of anyone. I even checked the back door. It was locked, deadbolt and all. Still, the feeling that I'd walked into a room someone had just left wouldn't let go of my stomach. I ended up turning on every light in the house, then laughed at myself and said out loud, "You're just alone and tired. That's all." Saying it didn't make it feel true. Later, close to midnight, I finally sat back down on the couch, all the lights still blazing. The storm outside had intensified. You could hear the wind scraping against the siding of the house like restless fingers. I grabbed my phone to distract myself and noticed something that almost made me drop it. My Do Not Disturb was off. Not just off, my settings looked different. Notifications were enabled for calls and messages from everyone, including unknown numbers. I never used it that way. My heart climbed into my throat. I was alone. Nobody else had touched my phone. I went straight to the recent calls list. No outgoing calls. No incoming calls. Then I checked my messages. At the top of the screen, there was one new unread text from an unknown number, received about 20 minutes earlier. "Why are the lights all on now?" I felt the room tilt. I slowly looked up at my bare living room window, at the now fully lit interior of my house spilling into the darkness outside. My first instinct was to grab a knife, but my legs moved on their own and carried me to the front door. I twisted the deadbolt as quietly as I could without breaking into a full run. As I backed away from the door, my phone buzzed again. Same number. "You didn't look this nervous earlier." I quickly scrolled up, thinking maybe there were older messages I'd missed. There weren't. Just those two, both time-stamped after the router first went out. My hands were shaking when I typed back, "Who is this?" I waited, staring at the three dots as they blinked, disappeared, then blinked again. Finally, "I liked you better when you couldn't see me." That was enough. My fear switched from something creeping and psychological to sharp and practical. Someone was watching my house. Someone had been watching when the lights were off, when my internet was cutting in and out, when I thought I was alone in my own head. I called 911 with my voice barely steady. "There's someone outside my house," I told the dispatcher. "They're texting me. They know which lights are on. I'm alone." They took my address, told me to stay on the line, to move away from windows, to lock doors. I'd already done that. While I waited for the sirens I couldn't yet hear, the unknown number sent one last message. "You don't have to be scared. I just wanted to see what people do when no one's watching." I didn't respond. I clutched the phone until my fingers hurt, listening for footsteps that never came. By the time the police arrived, the storm had buried any tracks that might have been in the snow. They searched around the property, checked every room, and told me what they always tell people in stories like this. It's probably a prank. Could be someone who knows you. Could be a neighbor kid. But when they asked if anyone else had my Wi-Fi password, if anyone else knew I was staying home alone that night with my phone on silent, I couldn't think of a single person who fit both. One of the officers suggested I get a camera system and maybe stay with family for a few days. I did both. I changed my number, got new locks, installed cameras, and started leaving a light on outside at night instead of in every room. But sometimes, when the Wi-Fi glitches for just a second or the house makes an unfamiliar noise, I catch myself staring at my dark phone and thinking about the line in that last text, when no one's watching. Because here's the part I still don't like to admit. There was a moment before the messages, before the cops, before the panic, when the silence felt good, when I wanted to be unreachable, unseen, unknowable. And that's exactly what someone like that is counting on. I've never liked Christmas, not really. When my parents divorced, Christmas turned into this custody negotiation every year, a performance of we're all fine that fooled nobody. As an adult, I solved it by opting out. I'd tell my mom I had to work late, tell my dad I wasn't feeling well, and spend Christmas night alone in my apartment pretending the date didn't matter. But 3 years ago, on a whim, and because I was tired of staring at the same walls, I decided to take a late walk through the park near my place instead of rotting on the couch. It was about 10:30 p.m., cold enough that my breath fogged in front of me. The park is usually packed with kids and joggers during the day, but that night it was empty except for a few distant houses with colored lights blinking like fading beacons. I told myself I was being productive, getting some exercise, starting one of those new habits people write about online. Mostly I just didn't want to be home with my thoughts. I walked the main path, hands in my pockets, headphones in but no music playing, pretending I wasn't listening for anything. Halfway around the loop, I heard it. A scream. Not playful, not the sound of someone joking around. It was raw, tearing, like someone had been holding it in for too long. It came from deeper in the park, past the playground, near the line where the trees get thicker. I stopped walking. The sound cut off almost as soon as it started. I pulled one earbud out, then the other. "Hello?" I called out, hating how my voice shook. No answer. Just the distant hum of cars from the main road and the faint rustle of wind through bare branches. My first reaction was to assume it was a trick of acoustics, some TV from a nearby house bouncing off the buildings. But there weren't any open windows. It was freezing. And that scream had been too close. Too real. I started walking again, telling myself I'd just go a bit further, see if there was anyone in obvious distress, then call 911 if I had to. As I approached the playground, metal and plastic coated in a light layer of frost, my heart felt like it was beating in my throat. I noticed something off the path. A dark shape slumped against one of the trees just beyond the swing set. It looked like a trash bag at first, but it was sitting too neatly, like it had arranged itself. "Hey," I called out. "You okay?" No answer. I stepped off the asphalt path into the frozen grass, my sneakers crunching, eyes locked on the shape. The closer I got, the more it resolved into a person. And suddenly, I wished more than anything that it wasn't. It was a man, maybe mid-30s, in a thin gray hoodie and jeans, no coat, no gloves. His head was tilted back against the tree, face turned slightly towards me, eyes open but unfocused. There were no visible injuries, no blood, just this weird stillness, like he'd been emptied of something essential. I stopped a few feet away. "Sir?" I tried again. "Do you need help?" That's when his eyes snapped to mine with such sudden clarity that I flinched. "Do you hear it too?" he whispered. His voice sounded like it had been unused for days, dry, cracking, but there was a sharpness underneath. I glanced around, suddenly hyper-aware of the empty park. "Hear what?" I asked, trying not to sound as scared as I felt. He frowned, almost disappointed. "Of course you don't. You're not here for that. You're here because you're running away from a different noise." His eyes scanned my face like he knew exactly what that meant. "The kind inside your head." I swallowed. "Do you want me to call someone? An ambulance? The police?" He laughed then, softly, like I'd told him a sweet but clueless joke. "They don't come out here for screams anymore," he said. "Nobody believes them. They think it's just fireworks or drunks. No one wants to admit they hear somebody breaking." He tapped his temple with 2 fingers, slowly. "Inside." Unease crawled up my spine. It wasn't just what he said. It was how matter-of-fact it sounded, like he was reciting a fixed truth. "Look," I said carefully. "It's Christmas. You're going to freeze out here. I can call a shelter, or—" He cut me off. "Why are you out here?" he asked. "You're not dressed for a walk. You didn't bring gloves. You keep looking behind you like you left something on." He tilted his head slightly. "You're hiding." Something in me bristled. "I'm just taking a walk," I lied, clearing my head. "From who?" he asked. "Your family? Your job? Yourself?" His gaze was steady in a way that felt invasive. "You know what the worst sound in the world is?" he continued, not waiting for my answer. "It's not screaming. Screaming means someone still wants help. The worst sound is when it all goes quiet and nobody calls your name." The urge to turn and walk away was almost overwhelming, but something in his words dug into me. I thought about the unanswered text from my mom, the ignored voicemail from my dad earlier that afternoon. "You're not alone," I heard myself saying. "If you're hearing things, there are people who can help you. But not if you stay out here. Not like this." He blinked slowly, like he was considering that. "You really think I'm hearing things?" he asked. "I don't know what you're hearing," I admitted. "But there are hotlines, clinics." I took my phone out of my pocket. "I can call someone for you right now." He stared at the phone in my hand, then met my eyes again. "You don't get it," he said quietly. "You're not the one who found me. I'm the one who let you find yourself." He nodded toward the houses beyond the park, where a few dim Christmas lights blinked. "You left a warm place to come walk in the dark alone, and you didn't even ask yourself why. You just didn't want to hear how quiet it really gets." Before I could respond, the scream came again. Louder this time, closer. But it wasn't coming from anywhere in the trees. It was coming from him. His mouth wasn't open. His body didn't move. Yet the sound poured out, this horrible, bottomless, agonized wail that clawed at the inside of my skull. I stumbled back, hands clamped over my ears, dropping my phone into the dead grass. It felt like that scream was inside my bones, vibrating everything that ever hurt. Then, just as abruptly, it stopped. I opened my eyes, gasping. The man was watching me with a calm, almost sympathetic expression. "That's what it sounds like when you finally hear yourself," he said. "You spend years drowning it out with work, with people, with noise. One night you turn everything off and walk into the dark, and there it is. You think it's coming from somewhere else, from someone else, but you're just listening to the echo." I wanted to say that wasn't me, that my life wasn't that bad, that I just didn't like Christmas. But the words felt empty, because there was a small, terrified part of me that recognized that sound, that had heard it in quieter, smaller versions in my own head for years. I didn't want to be like him, alone in the dark, screaming on the inside where no one could hear. I picked up my phone with shaking hands and backed away from him. "I'm calling someone," I said, my voice hoarse. "For you, for me. I don't care, but I'm not staying here." He nodded like I'd just passed some kind of test. Good, he said. Some people just sit down next to me and never get back up. He leaned his head back against the tree again, eyes drifting past me. Go home, he added. Answer your mother's texts. Tell your father you heard him. Let someone hear you before you sound like that. I turned and walked away, half expecting to hear the scream again, half expecting him to call me back. He didn't. I called the non-emergency police line once I reached the main road and told them there was a man in the park who might need help. They said they'd send someone when they could. I don't know if they ever found him. Maybe he really was just some unstable guy talking nonsense in the cold. Maybe the scream was something my brain did under stress. I never saw anything about it in the news. But that night, for the first time in years, I called my mom back. I let her talk. I told her I'd been lonely. I called my dad the next day and actually listened to him, instead of half resenting every word. And when the house got too quiet later that week, I didn't go for a walk. I called a therapist and made an appointment. I still think about that man sometimes. About the way he said nobody comes for screams anymore. About how long someone has to hurt before they finally get that loud. I used to think working in retail on Christmas Eve was the worst thing a person could endure. Endless lines, screaming kids, holiday music on loop until it claws at your sanity. Then I worked a Christmas night shift and realized the real horror starts after the doors lock and the music stops. A few years back, I was the closing manager at a small discount shop that tried very hard to look like one of those big box everything stores, but with half the staff and none of the security. Our Christmas sale had run late into the evening, and management decided to keep us open until midnight to catch last-minute shoppers. The holiday rush eventually died out, and by the time the last customer left, it was just me and an older cashier named Linda. The plan was simple: close at midnight, finish restocking, clean up the disaster the day had left, and lock up by 2 a.m. It was snowing hard enough that the parking lot looked like a blank page under the streetlights. By 12:20 a.m., we'd flipped the sign to closed, but as any retail worker knows, that doesn't stop people from trying the door. A few folks rattled it and peered in, saw us sweeping, and gave up. I was back near the toy aisle, reorganizing the carnage, when the chime over the front door went off. I frowned. The door was supposed to be locked. I called out, "Hey, we're closed for the night, sorry," expecting some apologetic last-minute shopper. Instead, a man's voice answered, "Sorry, I just need to use the restroom real quick, I'll be fast." I stepped into the main aisle and saw him at the front. Mid-30s maybe, dark beard, short hair, thick winter jacket zipped up to his chin. He held his hands out like he was surrendering. "Please," he said. "I've been driving all day, everything else is closed." I should have said no. Policy said no. But Linda gave me that look, the "it's Christmas, don't be an ass" look. I sighed. "Okay, bathroom's at the back, left of the stockroom door. But we're closing, so you gotta be quick." He grinned, too wide for the situation. "You're a lifesaver," he said, and walked straight toward the back. As he passed me, I got a faint whiff of something metallic and sour underneath his cologne, but I told myself I was imagining it. He disappeared into the single-occupancy restroom. The door shut. The lock clicked. I checked my watch. 12:27 a.m. I went back to stocking shelves, but found myself glancing down the main aisle every few minutes. At first, I didn't think anything of it. People sometimes take longer than they should, but by the time 15 minutes passed, unease pooled in my stomach. "He's been in there a while," I remarked to Linda. She shrugged, barely looking up from counting out the till. "Maybe he's sick." Another 10 minutes crawled by. Now we were past "maybe he's sick," and well into "this feels wrong." I walked to the back hallway and knocked gently. "Sir, everything okay in there?" No response. I tried again, louder this time. Still nothing. I didn't hear movement, flushing, running water, just the buzzing of the ceiling light. I was debating whether to get the key when headlights swung across the front windows, followed by the distinct crunch of tires on ice. A police cruiser rolled slowly into the lot and then stopped behind a single car that had been parked crooked near the entrance. Our lot was mostly empty by then. That car had blended into the mess of shoppers when I last looked, but now it was the only one left besides my own. The officer stepped out, shone his flashlight on the suspect car's plates, then walked to our locked front door and rapped on it. I hurried up, heart thudding. "Sorry, we're closed, but—" I began, and he cut me off with, "Ma'am, is the owner of that silver sedan inside right now?" I blinked. "I think so. He came in to use the restroom like half an hour ago." The officer's jaw tightened. He nodded once, brisk. "Point me to where?" We walked together down that long, too quiet aisle. My mind started doing that thing where it tries to fill in blanks with rational explanations, but my body had already gotten the message. Something is very wrong. When we reached the restroom door, the officer didn't waste time with gentle knocks. He banged hard, shouted, "Police, open up!" and listened. Silence. No shuffle, no startled cursing, nothing. He turned to me. "Do you have a key?" My hands shook as I dug through the small ring we kept under the customer service desk. When I finally found the right one, my palms were slick with sweat. He took it, unlocked the door, drew his gun, and pushed it open in one swift motion. The bathroom was empty. The light was on, the fan whirring, toilet lit up, but no one inside. For a moment, my brain couldn't compute it. "He went in," I insisted. "I swear he never came back out. The chime would have gone off. I didn't hear it." The officer scanned the small room, then looked up. He flicked his flashlight toward the ceiling, a drop ceiling with flimsy white panels. One of them was slightly askew, not enough that I'd noticed, but enough that someone trained to look would. "He went up," he said, more to himself than to me. He called something into his radio that I couldn't catch, then backed out and motioned for us to step away from the hallway. "Lock the front doors. Stay here. Don't go wandering around the store, okay?" Backup arrived faster than I thought possible. Within 10 minutes, 2 more cruisers pulled up, and officers entered quietly. They split up. 2 headed to the back, 1 stayed near us in the front. We heard muffled thumps overhead as they moved along the grid of ceiling tiles, voices low and calm. Every sound made me flinch. I couldn't stop thinking about how many times I'd walked under that ceiling alone when closing, trusting that the lock on the door was enough to keep the outside world out. Eventually, there was a sharp crash and a shout from the back, followed by, "Got him!" I would later find out they'd found him curled up above the restroom, wedged between beams, trying to stay perfectly still. He had a knife on him, and something far worse in the trunk of his car: duct tape, rope, zip ties, and a stained jacket that didn't look like it belonged to him. The officer on scene told me enough to make my stomach turn, but not enough to be cathartic. The man had been on the run for hours before he walked into our store. Earlier that night, he'd attacked a woman closing up a different shop across town. She survived, barely, and their security camera had caught part of his face and the first few digits of his license plate. They'd been combing parking lots near open businesses when they spotted his car in ours. The part that sits with me, that rots in the back of my brain, is this. I had unlocked the door and let him in. I had pointed to the back hallway and said, "Bathroom's right there." I had given him a place to hide when he realized he was being hunted. I replay that Christmas night a lot. Not because I think I could have tackled him or saved the day, but because it showed me how thin the barrier is between just another late customer and someone whose name you'll hear on the news. We like to think monsters have a look, wild eyes, obvious danger. Most of the time, they just look like regular people grateful for a restroom on a snowy night. Last Christmas was the coldest I can remember. I live in a small one-story house on the edge of a Midwestern town, the kind of place where winter comes early and overstays its welcome. I just started a new hybrid job, partly at the office, partly from home. And Christmas week lined up with a streak of brutal snowstorms. My manager was understanding. "Work from home all week," she emailed. At first I was excited. I pictured coffee in my favorite mug, thermal socks, Christmas music low in the background while the world outside disappeared under a soft white blanket. In reality, my home office was a cheap desk shoved under the bedroom window, and by Christmas night, I realized I hadn't spoken to anyone face to face in 3 days. That Christmas day, I barely left the chair. I logged off just after 8 p.m., shoulders aching and eyes burning from staring at spreadsheets and holiday sale numbers. Outside, snow was falling in dense, windswept sheets, the wind shaking the single-pane glass behind my monitor. I heated up a frozen dinner, washed the one pan I'd used, and decided to drag the trash bins to the curb so I wouldn't forget on pickup day. The cold hit me like a physical slap when I stepped outside. The world was so quiet it felt like I'd gone deaf. No cars, no voices, just the hiss of snow and the low moan of wind between houses. I hauled the bins to the curb, head down, and was turning back toward my front door when something to the left caught my eye. The snow along the side of my house didn't look right. Everywhere else the storm had laid down an even blanket of white, but there, it was broken, textured. I squinted through the blowing flakes and walked closer, boots crunching. It wasn't a random pattern. It was a line. Footprints. Clear, repeated impressions, like someone in regular shoes, not boots, had walked right alongside my house. My heart started pounding before my brain fully realized why. I followed the trail down the narrow side yard, the wind cutting through my jacket. The prints led straight past the living room window and then stopped in a messy cluster beneath the bedroom window, my bedroom window. Right behind where I'd been sitting all day, headphones on, lost in work and podcasts. In that spot, the snow was unevenly trampled, as if whoever it was had stood there for a while, shifting their weight, turning slightly, stepping closer, looking in through the tiny gaps between the blinds. My blinds had been closed, but if you pressed close enough, you could see through. Why would anyone be out here in this? I muttered to myself, like saying it out loud might make it logical. No one lived on the left side of my house. It was just a narrow gap to the neighbor's fence. There was no reason for anyone to walk that way unless they wanted to be right up against my windows. I stayed there too long, staring at those prints. I kept imagining the back of my own head, headphones on, totally unaware, while someone stood just inches away, separated by glass and cheap vinyl blinds. Eventually, the cold drove me back in. I stomped the snow off my boots, locked the front door, and checked the tiny latch on the bedroom window, pressing until it clicked. Then I tugged on the frame to be sure. Locked, triple-checked, just because that's the kind of person anxiety has wired me to be. I told myself it was a neighbor's kid, or someone cutting through the yard before the worst of the storm. By the time I went to bed around 11, I'd mostly convinced myself I was being dramatic. I peeked out once more before sleeping. The falling snow had already started to blur the footprints until they blended with the rest of the white. It felt like the storm was erasing the evidence for me. I slept surprisingly well. The first thought that popped into my head when I woke was the footprint trail. My body moved before I even really woke up. I swung my legs out of bed and went straight to the window in my t-shirt and pajamas. When I lifted the blinds, my grogginess vanished like someone had thrown cold water on me. New tracks. Fresh, crisp, unmistakable footprints punched into the snow, leading to the exact same spot under my window. This time they were the only prints in the entire yard. The snow around them was untouched, smooth, and glittering under the weak morning light. I just stared at them, my breath fogging the glass. Whoever had come back had done it while I slept, after I'd reassured myself nothing would happen. I grabbed my jacket and boots, forgetting to zip up properly, and went outside to check, needing to confirm what I already knew. The prints led from somewhere beyond my property line, stopped under my window again, circled slightly, and then doubled back, vanishing toward the street. No other disturbances, no vehicle tracks close by, no neighbor prints, just theirs. Back inside, my fingers numb and shaking, I called the non-emergency police line. I'm probably overreacting, I started, hating how small my voice sounded. But someone's been walking up to my bedroom window while I'm working and while I'm asleep. The dispatcher was calm, asked basic questions, said an officer would swing by when possible, and gently reminded me that with the weather and the holidays, they were stretched thin. I understood. What could they really do with just footprints and a creepy feeling? I tried to work that Christmas day, but my eyes kept darting to the window, my brain half listening for muffled crunches in the snow. Every time I looked, the wind had filled the footprints in a little more, smoothing their edges. By the time my shift ended at 8 p.m., the snow outside looked soft and untouched again, like nothing had ever broken its perfect surface. That should have comforted me. It didn't. Instead, I felt like the house and the storm were conspiring to pretend nothing had happened. I pushed the blinds aside and pressed my forehead to the glass. No prints, no movement, just wind swirling flakes in streetlight beams. I glanced down almost lazily at the window lock. My stomach dropped. The latch was flipped open. I froze. I knew, with the obsessive certainty of a chronic checker, that I had locked it the night before. I'd even tugged on it. I hadn't touched it all day. I reached out with a shaking hand and pulled gently on the frame. The window slid up noiselessly, opening into my bedroom. No resistance, no sticky paint. Just a quick, silent invitation. That was the moment something clicked in my brain. The tracks weren't just creepy. They were purposeful. Someone had come close enough to my sleeping face, separated only by a thin pane of glass and a cheap latch, to quietly unlock it, and I hadn't heard a thing. I backed away from the window like it might suddenly jump at me, grabbed my keys and coat, and left the house without even turning off my computer. I called the police from my car, parked in my own driveway, engine idling, heater off so I could hear if anything moved inside while I watched the dark outline of my house. 10 of the longest minutes of my life crawled by before a cruiser pulled up. The officer nodded at me, asked me to stay in the car, and went inside with one hand on his holster. Time got weird. A minute felt like 5. 5 felt like 30. I stared at my front door, expecting it to fly open at any second, but it stayed closed. By the time nearly 5 minutes had passed, my stomach twisted into a tight, cold knot. Something was wrong. Then the door did open. The officer stepped out, breathing hard, his face flushed with cold, and behind him, in handcuffs, was a man. Mid-40s, pale, stringy hair stuck to his forehead with sweat and blood. There was more blood on the officer's sleeve. The man looked wrong, not just dirty or unkempt. There was something hollow and calculated in his eyes, like he was disappointed the game was over so soon. He was hiding in a hallway closet, the officer said later, after backup arrived. Jumped me when I opened it. He's strong. You did the right thing calling. The man wouldn't stop staring at me as they walked him to the car, blood crusting on his cheek. I had this sudden, nauseating realization. He had probably watched me through that window for days. He probably stood inches away from me while I slept, watching the rise and fall of my breathing, fingers on the unlocked latch. The unlocked window wasn't the end of his plan. It was the beginning. I've been a security guard for a little over 8 years now, and I used to think Christmas night shifts were the safest. Most people are home with their families, offices are empty, and the worst I'd usually deal with was a drunk kid trying to sleep in the lobby. Last year proved me wrong. The building I'm assigned to is a glass and steel corporate block downtown, the kind of place that looks expensive enough that people assume there's something worth stealing inside. Crime in our city spikes in December, break-ins, thefts, even muggings, because people are desperate and broke. This particular Christmas, my usual co-worker took time off to be with his kids, and the company hadn't assigned anyone to replace him, so I was alone from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. I told myself it was fine, quiet, extra pay. I even brought leftover turkey, some instant coffee, and a couple of wrapped gifts I planned to open in the office just to feel less pathetic. The first time I saw them was around 11:30 p.m. I'd just finished my outside round and was standing by the front doors, watching the snow fall under the orange streetlights. Across the road, under a dead street lamp, two guys in dark winter coats were just standing there. No cars, no cigarettes, no phones out, just silhouettes facing my building. At first I thought they were waiting for a bus. Then I remembered that route doesn't run on Christmas night. I tapped on the glass like an idiot, half hoping they'd wave, half hoping they'd just leave. They didn't move, but something in my stomach did. I went back to walking my usual route. Ground floor, stairwells, back dock, parking lot. By the time I circled back to the lobby, they were gone. Probably nothing, I told myself out loud, just to fill the silence. The next time I saw them was Christmas night again, but a week later. Our building runs limited staff even between Christmas and New Year's, and I'd volunteered for overtime. It was around 1 a.m. when I stepped outside for some air. The city was even quieter than usual, the kind of quiet where you suddenly notice how loud the buzzing streetlights are. That was when I saw the same two figures across the street, in the same dark patch, angled toward me. This time I felt it like a physical sensation. My skin prickled under my uniform. Instead of ignoring them, I walked to the edge of the property line and made it very clear that I saw them. I even called out, "You guys need something?" My voice sounded small in the cold air. They didn't answer, didn't wave, didn't even shift. After a minute or two, they simply turned and walked down the block, disappearing between parked cars. The back of my neck wouldn't stop itching, but I told myself again, nothing happened, nobody got hurt, don't dramatize it. I tried to shake it off and concentrated on the mundane. Back inside, I checked the log, filled in some petty incident reports from earlier in the week, and eventually decided it was a good time for my Christmas dinner. Lukewarm turkey and instant mashed potatoes in the break room at the very end of a long hallway. I sat under a dying fluorescent light with my plastic fork, scrolling through group chats full of photos of other people's families, laughing kids, ugly sweaters. I turned my phone face down after a while. That was when I heard it. A sharp, hollow clank from somewhere in the hallway, like metal hitting concrete, but muffled. It wasn't the building settling. I'd grown used to those sounds. This was closer, intentional. I froze, fork halfway to my mouth, just listening. The heater hummed. The vending machine rattled a little. Silence after that. Curiosity beat fear by a very thin margin. I stood up, wiping my hands on my pants, and walked to the doorway. "Hello?" I called. Because that's what you're supposed to do, I guess. No response. I leaned out into the hallway. It stretched left, then turned sharply like an L toward the older side of the building, where there was an emergency exit stairwell we never used. The lights flickered once, that cheap buzzing that always made me think the bulbs were trying to quit. For a good 30 seconds, I just stood there, listening. Nothing. "Probably the pipes," I muttered, and forced myself back to the table. I finished my food, but my appetite was gone. My hands had started to shake, just a little, and I couldn't decide if it was the cold or the creeping sense that I wasn't actually alone. Back in the security office, surrounded by monitors, the logic side of my brain tried to take over. No alarms, no motion alerts, no forced windows. The system would have flagged anything major. Still, I couldn't relax the way I usually did around 2 a.m. when I just sit and half-watch the cameras. I kept thinking about the two men across the street, about the sound in the hallway, about how empty this building really was. I told myself I was going to do one more round, mainly to prove to myself that it was all in my head. I clipped my radio on, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped out. The outside perimeter was dead. Fresh snow had started to fall, and there weren't even old tracks in it. Nothing had crossed the back lot in hours. My boots squeaked on the frozen ground as I circled the building. The quiet was almost peaceful, if it wasn't for my racing thoughts. When I finally went back inside and started down the L-shaped hallway, I felt that same itch between my shoulder blades. The corridor turned, and at the far end, behind a wired glass window, was the unused stairwell and the old emergency exit door. That door was a relic from when the building was first built. Heavy metal, off the security system grid, and sealed with an industrial padlock to compensate. I'd checked it 1,000 times on previous shifts. It was always locked, always dusty, always boring. Not this time. As I got closer, my flashlight beam caught something on the floor. The padlock. It was in 2 pieces, separated cleanly like someone had pried or cut it apart. The chain that usually held the door tight was hanging loose, swaying just a little as if someone had recently passed through. I remember this useless, absurd thought crossing my mind. They told me this building was dead on Christmas. My heart pounded in my ears. I didn't open the door. I backed away, walked as calmly as I could manage to the security office, and only when the door closed behind me did I run to the monitors. Rewinding the footage, I watched my own night unfold from angles I hadn't seen. There I was, standing outside under the awning, staring across at 2 men on the opposite side of the street. Then, while I was still in frame, distracted by them, a second camera caught those same 2 shapes cutting around the back of the building, staying in blind spots I'd never thought much about. One of them carried something bulky, maybe a crowbar. They moved like they'd rehearsed it. They approached the old stairwell door, and within less than a minute, the lock was off, and they were inside the building. The timestamp on the footage matched almost exactly with the time I was going back in for my Christmas dinner. Fast forward, and there I was again, walking past the hallway door into the break room. One of the men was already inside the building, pressed flat behind an interior door just 2 feet from where I walked. When I heard that clank earlier, it wasn't pipes. It was him knocking into a metal desk, trying not to be seen. The scariest part, hands down, was what came next. While I sat in the break room with my back to the hallway, they moved. On one camera, you can see one of them peeking out, ducking back as I walked by. Another angle shows them slipping into one of the tenant offices, some software company, moving directly toward labeled metal cabinets and server towers like they knew exactly what they were looking for. Hard drives, physical files, some backup tapes. At one point, one of them passes through a corner of the hallway camera frame. On his hip is something dark and angular. It could be a large knife, could be the grip of a small gun. Either way, I realized they weren't just burglars. They were prepared for a more violent scenario if they were cornered. As soon as they saw me go back outside for another round, they moved like they were on a timer. On screen, they stuffed equipment into duffel bags and retraced their path, slipping back down the old stairwell and out into the parking lot. By the time I came back inside to discover the snapped lock, they were already several minutes gone. I called the police, my voice sounding small on the recording when I replayed it later. Officers showed up, took statements, pulled the footage, and told me I'd done the right thing by not opening that stairwell door alone. The company lost data assets, which is corporate speak for things someone, somewhere, didn't want stolen. There were quiet meetings, hushed phone calls, increased security discussions. It all felt a little too rehearsed, like someone had been waiting for exactly this to happen. What I can't shake, even now, is not just that I was nearly face-to-face with armed intruders on Christmas night, or that I walked past someone hiding in the dark only a couple of feet away. It's the realization of how many times before I'd walked those halls assuming I was safe because it was Christmas, or because the cameras were on, or because in my head criminals had the decency to take holidays off. That night taught me how fragile that sense of safety really is, how quickly it collapses once you see the replay from another angle and realize you were the blind spot. Never confuse routine for safety. The moments you feel most protected, by habit, holidays, or familiarity, are often when your guard is down the lowest, and that's precisely when the real dangers slip past you. That Christmas break, I decided I was done sleeping on my parents' lumpy fold-out couch. They lived in a small, dying city several hours away, and every visit turned into the same claustrophobic routine. Forced conversation, TV blaring, no privacy, and my mother pretending everything was fine while my father drank in his chair. So when I saw how cheap the local Airbnbs were in their town, I booked one for the whole week of Christmas. It was a small house on a quiet street with staged photos showing warm lighting and festive throw pillows. The listing described it as cozy, private, and perfect for holiday getaways. The host, a guy named Eric, had good reviews and a high response rate. What could go wrong? I arrived on Christmas Eve just after the sun had slipped behind thick clouds. The drive had been long and empty, with most people already where they needed to be. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed the neighborhood was darker than I expected. No streetlights. Most houses had their curtains drawn and lights off. Only a few faint glows hinted that anyone lived there at all. In contrast, the Airbnb was fully lit. Warm yellow spilling from every window like someone had turned on every light to fight the darkness. It felt exposed, like a stage in the center of an unenthusiastic audience. Inside, though, the place looked exactly like the photos. Clean, minimal, a little too curated. A tiny fake Christmas tree sat in the corner of the living room, its plastic branches barely holding a cheap string of lights. A sign above the couch read, "Good vibes only." It made me roll my eyes, but also weirdly comforted me. At least someone had tried to make the place look festive. I unpacked my bag in the bedroom, answered a "let me know if you need anything" text from Eric with a polite thumbs up, and decided to stay in for the night. Christmas Eve dinner for me was gas station snacks and a microwave burrito, eaten in bed while Netflix droned in the background. Around 9 or 10 p.m., just as I was settling into that strange half-sleep you get watching something you don't care about, I heard knocking. Not a timid little tap. 3 solid, evenly spaced knocks at the front door. I paused the TV and lay there for a second, listening, hoping it had been the house settling or something hitting the siding. Then it came again. Same pattern. Maybe the host? I thought, grabbing my phone. No missed calls or messages. No Airbnb notifications. I hesitated, then made my way down the hallway, bare feet whispering over the laminate floor. As I approached the door, the knocking continued in that same patient rhythm. Whoever it was either really wanted me to answer or was following some script. I looked through the peephole without thinking. A guy in his 30s stood there, wearing a black knit cap and a red flannel jacket that looked like it had seen too many winters. His face was ordinary in that instantly forgettable way, but his expression was off, a strange mix of confusion and expectation. I opened the door, just like an idiot in every horror story does. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual but firm. He blinked rapidly when he saw me, as if he'd been rehearsing something and I wasn't the person he was expecting. "Oh," he muttered, his eyes darting past me into the house. Sorry." His voice was flat, but there was an undercurrent of agitation. "Can I help you?" I asked. He mouthed something I didn't catch, then shook his head, almost angrily, and walked away without another word. I watched him go down the short walkway and disappear into the dark street, where no car waited for him. "Wrong house, I guess," I said to myself, closing and locking the door, though the explanation felt thin. People who knock that confidently usually know where they're going. Christmas Day passed quietly. I spent most of it with my parents, enduring small talk, bad jokes, and my mother's sad attempts at normalcy, before retreating back to the Airbnb around 6 p.m. There was something oddly comforting in having my own space to go back to, even if the house felt theatrically empty. I made tea, changed into sweats, and curled up in the bedroom with the TV on low. Outside, the darkness seemed even heavier than the night before. The other houses remained almost entirely unlit, like the whole street had decided to sleep through Christmas. Around 9 p.m., the knocking started again. Same door, same pattern. 3 steady, unhurried knocks. This time, dread rose faster than curiosity. I grabbed my phone and checked for messages. Nothing from Eric. I walked down the hall more slowly than the night before, my heartbeat amplifying each step. Before I got too close, I glanced through the peephole, half hoping no one would be there. But he was. Same man, same hat, same red flannel. He wasn't even shivering. He just stood there, staring at the door like it had personally offended him. I cracked the door open just enough to speak, the chain lock still on. "Can I help you?" I asked, voice firm now. His eyes widened when he saw me, that same look of surprise, but this time stronger, almost like disbelief. "Is everything okay? Are you looking for someone?" I added. He stared at me for a long second, then his face flattened into something hollow and emotionless. "No," he said quietly. The word sounded wrong, as though it wasn't answering my question but denying something else. Then he backed away and walked off again, swallowed by the dark. I shut the door, engaged every lock I could find, and walked back to the bedroom, leaving the door open so I could hear the rest of the house. Something about his reactions bothered me. If he had the wrong house, why return? If he needed help, why say nothing? The second no wasn't confusion. It was resentment, like I had ruined a plan by existing. I thought about messaging Eric, but what was I supposed to say? "Hey, some weird guy keeps knocking on the door and saying almost nothing. Merry Christmas?" It sounded paranoid. I turned off the lights around midnight and tried to sleep, the faint glow of the TV illuminating the room as background noise. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up with that instant, wired awareness that something was wrong. The house was utterly black and silent. No TV glow, no hum of the fridge. I couldn't even hear the heater. For a moment I thought the power had gone out, but my phone on the nightstand still showed a full battery icon and network bars. Then, through the silence, I heard it. A faint murmur outside, like distant whispering. Knock, knock, knock. This time the sound boomed through the house, harsher and more desperate. I swung my legs out of bed, my heart thudding against my ribs. The hallway beyond my bedroom door was pure darkness. My hand fumbled for the light switch. Nothing. I grabbed my phone, using its screen to cast a small circle of light, and stepped into the hall. The knocking continued, shaking the flimsy front door in its frame. As I crept toward it, I caught a flash of movement in the side window at the end of the hallway. A shadow darting past, too fast and low to be the guy I'd already seen. I stopped just short of the entryway, my stomach twisting. Instead of going straight to the door, I angled toward the small window beside it and peered around the edge of the curtain, careful not to make a silhouette. The man in the red flannel stood there, but further back from the door this time, just visible under the weak porch light. Behind him, half hidden in the darkness of the yard, was another figure. Taller, bulkier, face obscured. They weren't standing casually. They were poised, waiting. I turned to back away, muscles trembling, and that's when I saw him. A face in the back window, at the far end of the hallway. Not pressed up against the glass, but close enough that I could make out eyes, nose, and the suggestion of a hoodie pulled low. We locked eyes. He tilted his head, just a fraction, like he was examining me through a microscope. A sick, animal kind of panic surged through me. I dropped any pretense of stealth and ran, full speed, into the bedroom, slammed the door, dragged the dresser in front of it with shaking hands, and dialed 911. While I was talking to the operator, voice breaking, struggling to get words out, the house came alive with sound. Multiple sets of footsteps pounded across the porch and circled the exterior, boots thudding on wooden steps, crunching on dead leaves. Doorknobs rattled, windows shuttered in their frames as someone tested them, pushed against them, tried to pry them. I heard hushed voices, angry and impatient, too low to distinguish words. The operator kept saying, "Stay with me. Stay on the line. Officers are on their way." I pressed my back against the dresser and watched the sliver of light at the bottom of the door, terrified I'd see shadows blocking it. Those few minutes felt like an eternity. The men moved around the house systematically, like they'd done this before, checking every possible access point. There were at least 4 different sets of footsteps, maybe more. The front door banged once, twice, harder each time, as if they were testing whether the frame would give. One of them must have realized the bedroom was at the back, because I heard deliberate steps outside my window, then a sharp tap on the glass. Just one. A courtesy knock, almost. Like he wanted me to know he knew exactly where I was. Somewhere in the distance, a faint wail grew louder, the sound of sirens slicing through the quiet. The noises outside cut off abruptly. No more tapping, no more footsteps. Silence fell so suddenly that my ears rang. I stayed on the phone until flashing blue and red lights spilled through the cracks around the boarded-up blinds, and I heard an officer's voice shouting, "Police, if anyone's inside, announce yourself." Later, after the officers swept the house and the yard, they told me something that still makes my skin crawl. "You're not the first person to call from this address," one of them said, looking uncomfortable. "A few months back, there was a situation here. Different guests, some kind of dispute. Nothing we can get into, but yeah, this place has a history." When the police contacted Eric, the host, he showed up at the house looking more annoyed than worried. His first question to me wasn't, "Are you okay?" It was, "Did they break anything I'll have to replace?" He brushed the whole thing off as local weirdos and said something about bad blood with a group of guys who don't know when to let things go. He wouldn't elaborate. The police couldn't tie the incident to anyone specific, and the men who'd surrounded the house disappeared into the night like smoke. No security cameras, no plates, no names. Just their boots in the dirt and their breath on the other side of the glass. I left the next morning and haven't used Airbnb since. I still think about those first 2 nights, the way the man at the door looked genuinely surprised to see me, not hostile yet, just thrown off. I think they expected someone else. Maybe a past guest. Maybe Eric himself. Maybe they thought I was hiding him. Maybe they didn't care who answered as long as someone did. Working the front desk in the ER on Christmas night is its own kind of loneliness. The lobby is decorated with paper snowflakes and a plastic tree that's missing half its lights. Seasonal music hums too softly from a forgotten speaker, and every person who walks in is dealing with something bad enough to ruin what's supposed to be a happy day. I volunteered for the shift because I don't really have a family to celebrate with, and the extra holiday pay felt like a decent consolation prize. That year, it was just me and my coworker Amy at the front desk from midnight to 4 a.m., checking in whoever came through the sliding doors while the automatic voice repeated, "Welcome to Mercy General." We joked about ugly sweaters and stale Christmas cookies just to keep the air from feeling too heavy. Around 2 a.m., Amy stood up, stretched, and said, "I'm gonna hit the cafeteria before they close. You good here?" I nodded. "Yeah, go. If Santa shows up, I'll stall him until you get back." She laughed and walked off down the hall, leaving me alone in the front lobby. Not 60 seconds later, the sliding doors hissed open, and a man stepped in. He was in his late 20s or early 30s, wearing a black zip-up hoodie, black jeans, and no gloves despite the freezing air. His hair was dark, a little long, and looked greasy, like he hadn't had access to a shower in a while. There was nothing overtly threatening about him. But as he approached the desk, I felt my body go on alert in that animal way, before my brain could name why. He stopped at the counter and stared at me for a beat too long, like he was memorizing my face. "I'm looking for Hannah Smith," he said. The name wasn't exactly that, but close. A very generic, very forgettable female name. His voice was oddly flat, too casual for someone looking for a relative in the ER on Christmas. "Okay, let me check for you," I replied, turning to my monitor to scan the patient registry. Nothing. No one with that last name in the system that night or in the last 24 hours. I don't have anyone by that name admitted here, I told him. She might be at one of the other hospitals in the area. There's St. Mary's, County General. He nodded, but his eyes were still fixed on me, not on the brochures or directions. Right, okay, thanks. He turned and left as quietly as he'd come in. I glanced over at our security guard, who had been stationed by the entrance. He met my eyes and raised his eyebrows just a bit. That universal, "Yeah, that was weird" expression. I shrugged back and tried to laugh it off. I told myself I was reading too much into it because it was late and I was tired. When Amy came back with a styrofoam cup of bad coffee and a chocolate chip cookie, I mentioned him casually. Some guy just came in looking for a random name, gave me the creeps for some reason. She rolled her eyes. It's Christmas. People get lonely. Maybe he just got the wrong hospital. We spent the next couple of hours in a slow, sleepy routine. A drunk driver, a kid with a fever, a woman with chest pain. By 4 a.m., my shift was over. The staff lot was behind the building, far from the main entrance, because patients and visitors should have priority parking. At 4 a.m. on Christmas night, it felt like walking into a frozen void. Rows and rows of empty cars, lights buzzing overhead, the sky just beginning to hint at dawn. I wrapped my coat tighter and started toward my car, phone in hand, keys in my pocket. Somewhere between the entrance and my parking spot, that feeling hit me. That crawling sense on the back of your neck, like you're not actually alone. I didn't see anyone. No footsteps echoed behind me. But I thought of the man in the hoodie, and my pace quickened without me telling it to. You're being dramatic, I whispered to myself. You work at an ER. You're bound to meet weird people. I unlocked my car, slid into the driver's seat, and locked the doors in one motion, more out of habit than conscious fear. My bag landed on the passenger side, spilling a few pens and a crumpled candy wrapper. I checked my rearview mirror. Empty back seat, just dark fabric and a forgotten water bottle. For some reason, that eased me more than anything else. The drive home took about 20 minutes down long, mostly empty streets, Christmas lights still blinking in front yards and in apartment windows, like the holiday was stubbornly hanging on. The strange part was the constant sense that there was a car behind me. That feeling you get when someone tailgates you. But every time I checked my mirror, there was nothing but open road. No headlights, no other drivers, just me and my imagination. I pulled into my driveway at exactly 4:23 a.m., according to the dashboard clock. The neighborhood was dark and quiet, most houses lit only by the soft glow of Christmas trees through curtains. I parked in the driveway instead of the garage because I was too tired to bother with the extra steps. I killed the engine, grabbed my bag and got out, shivering as the cold air hit me. The habit that probably saved my life that night is something I've never really thought about before. I always lock the front door the moment I step inside. I can't relax otherwise. So as soon as I crossed the threshold, my hand went to the deadbolt almost automatically. Click. Locked. I hadn't even stepped out of my shoes yet when I heard it. Heavy footsteps pounding up my front steps, fast, like someone sprinting. The door handle rattled hard, like whoever it was fully expected it to be open. I froze. For a second, my brain couldn't catch up. Then I heard a man's voice on the other side of the door. "Excuse me, ma'am? Can you please open the door? I need help. Please open the door." His tone was calm but urgent, the kind you hear from patients who are trying to sound polite while panicking. But I recognized the voice. It was the man from the ER. The same flatness, the same strange, too even cadence under the fake urgency. My throat went dry. I didn't answer. Slowly, as quietly as I could, I stepped back from the door and fumbled my phone out of my bag, hands shaking. I dialed 911, whispering my address and telling them someone was trying to get into my house. While I was on the call, everything went silent outside. No more rattling, no more pleading. When I finally dared to look through the peephole, I saw the back of him as he jogged away down the sidewalk and melted into the dark. Black hoodie, black jeans, same messy hair. I don't know how long I stood there before the red and blue lights finally washed over my living room walls. An officer came to the door, took my statement, walked around my property with a flashlight, and then he said the sentence that made my skin crawl more than anything that had happened so far. "Did you know your back car door is still open?" I hadn't used the back seats in days. The realization hit in slow, sickening waves. He hadn't followed me by car. He had been in my back seat the entire time I drove home. I had checked my mirror, not my car. The officers pulled the hospital's security footage later that day. The man had been pacing outside the sliding doors for almost an hour before he came in. He'd watched me, watched which badge I wore, where I clipped my keys, what my routine looked like when my shift ended. Later, they tracked him to a cheap motel across town. He'd been living out of his car, picking random women who worked nights, following them, learning their patterns. When they questioned him, he wouldn't admit to planning anything violent. He just kept saying, "I just wanted to talk to her. I just wanted to see her again. She was nice to me." As if that explained hiding in the back seat of a stranger's car on Christmas night and trying to force your way into her home. Sometimes people ask why I still work the night shift after that. The honest answer is that I don't fully trust daylight either. What I learned that Christmas is that danger doesn't always look like a stranger in a mask. Sometimes it looks like a quiet man in a hoodie asking for a name you won't remember. It looks ordinary. It blends in until it doesn't. Being kind in your work doesn't require you to ignore your instincts. You don't owe anyone access to your personal space or your home, no matter how harmless they seem. Respecting your own boundaries might be the only line between suspicion and tragedy. I always thought Christmas alone would be peaceful. That year, I convinced myself staying in my small rented house instead of going to my parents' place would finally give me the grown-up holiday I always imagined. Cheap wine, horror movies, and leftover Chinese takeout instead of forced cheer and fake smiles around my father. It was snowing hard all Christmas Eve, the kind of snow that piles up against doors and silences the world. By Christmas night, the storm had turned into a full-on whiteout, and every weather alert on my phone insisted travel was a terrible idea. So I dimmed the living room lights, turned off the lamp by the window, heated up leftovers, and queued up a horror movie marathon on my TV, pretending the storm outside was just part of the ambiance. Around 9:30 p.m., the wind had picked up so much that the house seemed to inhale and exhale with each gust. I remember thinking, if the power goes out, I'm screwed, but weirdly excited at the thought of candles and shadows. Halfway through my second movie, my eyes started doing that unfocused thing where you're looking at the screen but not really seeing it, just letting sounds wash over you. Out of nowhere, in the corner of my eye, something moved against the far wall of the hallway. A shadow. It darted across like someone had walked past the open bedroom door. I straightened up instantly and paused the movie. The house went dead quiet except for the storm and the faint hum of the fridge. "Hello?" I called out. My own voice sounded wrong, too loud and too small at the same time. I got up, forcing myself to walk toward the hallway. My living room bleeds into the hall where the bathroom and my bedroom sit at the end, so there aren't many hiding places. I flicked on the hallway light and scanned the floor and doorways. Nothing. The bedroom door was half closed, just like I'd left it. The bathroom door was wide open, dark inside. I told myself it had to be a car passing, lights bending weirdly through blowing snow, except there hadn't been a single car since the storm really started. I shook it off and went to the kitchen to top off my glass of wine. I remember saying out loud, trying to sound casual, "You're just jumpy, man. Christmas paranoia." When I came back and sank into the couch, I unpaused the movie just to have something talking at me. But I was listening more to the house now. The wind, the occasional crack of settling wood, the old heater's whine. Then, as the movie hit some tense scene, I saw another shadow. This time it moved across the wall behind the TV, just above it, like something or someone just leaned out from the hallway to peek at me, then pulled back the instant I looked. I whipped my head toward the opening. No one, but my heart was racing in this sickening, hollow way that felt like I'd swallowed ice. "If someone's here, this isn't funny," I said, voice already shaking. No answer. Just the storm flinging snow at the windows. Something about the silence pressed on my chest. I turned all the living room lights on, then walked slowly through the entire house. Bedroom, bathroom, kitchen, even the small storage closet by the back door. I opened cabinets, pulled the shower curtain aside, checked every corner I could think of, knowing logically that there wasn't really anywhere for a full-grown person to hide. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling I was intruding in my own home. Like someone had been here long enough to consider this place theirs, not mine. After that, sitting back down felt impossible. So I decided to call it a night. Maybe a hot shower and my weighted blanket would reset my brain. Upstairs in the tiny bathroom, I let the water run hot and stepped in, trying to focus on the sound of it hitting the tub instead of the wind battering the house. I closed my eyes, pressing my head against the tile, breathing in the steam. That was when a sound tore through the house. A single thunderous slam that felt like it hit the bones of the building, and mine. The floor vibrated under my wet feet. I froze, water still hitting my shoulders. For a moment I told myself it was just the wind throwing something against the siding. But deep down, I knew this sound came from inside. Heavy, angry. I shut off the water, hands shaking, and grabbed the towel, barely drying off before throwing clothes on over damp skin. The second I turned off the bathroom fan, the silence hit me like pressure. No creaks, no heater, not even car noise from the distance. Just the storm outside and my own breathing. I opened the bathroom door slowly and peered down the stairs. Every instinct screamed at me to stay put and lock the door, but curiosity and fear are twisted siblings. I descended step by step, bare feet cold against the wood, ears straining for any shuffle or breath that didn't belong to me. The living room looked normal at first glance. TV on pause, couch, coffee table, empty takeout box, my wine glass still on the side table, nothing overturned. Then I walked into the kitchen and saw the back door. The top hinge clung loosely to the frame, screws bent and half out, while the bottom part of the door sagged inward. The other two hinges lay on the floor, ripped out, surrounded by splinters of fractured wood. The door was hanging crookedly open, letting in snow and frigid air. If something had blown it open from the outside, the frame would have failed outward, but the wood was shattered on the inside edge. Whoever had done that had been inside, leaving. My throat went dry. My hands moved faster than my head. I bolted for the stairs, nearly slipping, and locked myself in the upstairs bathroom with my phone. When I called 911, my voice didn't even sound like mine. I told them someone had broken into my house and destroyed my back door. While I waited, I sat on the edge of the tub, staring at the crack under the bathroom door, convinced at any second a shadow would stop there, blocking even the sliver of light from the hallway. Every creak of the house felt like footsteps. Every gust of wind like a breath at the keyhole. When the officers finally arrived and checked the house, they confirmed what my eyes already knew, but my brain refused to accept. The door had been blown off its hinges from the inside. "Looks like someone hit it from in here, not from out there," one of them said, crouching to examine the shattered frame. Like they swung it open too hard, got pissed, and it slammed back, hard enough to rip right out. I stood there in the kitchen, hugging myself, thinking about the shadows I'd seen. They hadn't been tricks of light or a mind poisoned by horror movies and red wine. Someone had been in my home for hours, moving just out of view whenever I turned my head, watching me pretend to relax on Christmas night. I don't know how long they were here, or how they got in, or what they were doing before they decided to leave violently. That's the thing that haunts me more than anything, the not knowing. I moved out by the end of January. I still hear that slam in my sleep sometimes, The sound of someone leaving my house like they were offended by my presence in it. Listen to your instincts. When your brain tells you something is wrong, don't gaslight yourself into ignoring it. Locks, lights, and calls for help can feel paranoid, until the one night real danger is standing in your hallway, watching you trust your fear less than you trust your own denial. My sister insisted Christmas dinner be at my apartment that year, so it feels like a new start. I'd just moved into a slightly run-down building downtown. Cheap rent, thin walls, creaky pipes, but it was mine, and I was proud of it. I spent the whole Christmas Eve and most of Christmas Day cleaning, cooking, and trying to make the place look more festive than tragic. My mom brought the ham, my sister brought dessert, my dad brought his usual quiet disapproval and a case of beer he promised was just for sharing. By 7 p.m., my little 2-bedroom unit was packed. Siblings, cousins, one neighbor I'd felt bad for, and invited at the last minute. We dragged my old study chair in from the bedroom to fit everyone at the table. Every seat was filled except one, at the far end. "That's for Uncle Mark," my mom said without thinking, then stopped, her face tightening. My uncle had died 2 Christmases before. A heart attack alone in his apartment 3 floors below mine, in this same building, before I ever moved in. I hadn't known him well, but my mom adored him. She tried to brush it off with a forced laugh and started passing the potatoes, but the comment hung in the air. "We don't need the extra chair," my sister said quietly, and my dad pushed it a bit away from the table, like that would erase the awkwardness. We all dug into the food, the noise rising again, silverware, clinking glasses, my youngest cousin firing off questions about Santa into the chaos. About halfway through dinner, when everyone was talking over each other, my neighbor leaned in and asked, "Did you guys hear about the old tenant in this unit?" I shot him a glare, shaking my head slightly. Not the time. But he didn't get it. "They say," he started, before my mom cut in sharply. "We're not doing ghost stories at the table, Ryan." The room went a little too quiet for a second. Then my cousin knocked over his drink. My dad swore, and the moment broke into the usual holiday mess. Still, the tension never fully left. It was only when dessert came out, pie, coffee, awkward toasts, that I noticed something. My apartment door, the one we'd triple-locked out of habit, was standing just slightly open. Not enough to see the hallway, but enough for a draft to slip through. I knew I'd locked it. I'd checked it 3 times earlier while pacing between the kitchen and living room. "Did someone go out for a smoke?" I asked. Everyone shook their heads. My dad went over, checked the locks, shut it firmly, muttering something about these old doors never closing right. He brushed it off, but after that, people stayed a little closer to the table, as if the hallway itself was uninvited. As coffee was poured, my mom set out one more mug than we needed and placed it in front of the empty chair at the far end. She froze for a heartbeat, hand still on the mug, then quietly slid it back into the cabinet and laughed it off. "Guess I can't count tonight." But from that point on, everyone avoided looking directly at that chair. My youngest cousin, usually loud and fearless, kept glancing at it, then at me. Finally, in a small voice she whispered, "Who's breathing?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" She tilted her head, listening. "I hear breathing, over there." She pointed straight at the empty chair. The radiator hissed, pipes groaned. Someone cleared their throat. We all told ourselves that was it. But as the night ended, and people gathered their coats, the air in that corner of the room felt noticeably colder. My mom hugged me a little too tight at the door and said, "He would have liked this, you know, you having everyone together." After everyone left, and the apartment went silent, I walked back to the table to start cleaning. One fork lay on the table in front of the empty chair, smeared with gravy. I hadn't put it there. And under the chair, on the worn hardwood, was a faint, wet impression, like the outline of a shoe print, melting snow that shouldn't have been there. We like to think we control who is invited into our homes and into our lives, especially during family gatherings and holidays.